For an insight into how these negotiations are being conducted, I'm joined by Christopher Hill. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Iraq and South Korea. And he also served as chief negotiator with North Korea in what was ultimately an unsuccessful talks over their nuclear weapons program between 2005 and 2008. Ambassador Hill, welcome to Meet the Press. And let me just start with what you heard as the sticking point. Take us inside this room. You've been at this point before. You hear this pessimism. Is it real, or are they playing with us a little bit?
Oh, I think it's a little of both. I mean, certainly from the U.S. vantage point, they need to go back to Washington and kind of oversell the deal. I mean, the deal is so hinged on technical issues that it is going to be hard to sell. I mean, it just doesn't sing when you bring it back to people. At the same time, the Iranians need to come back to Tehran and say, oh, we just got all our sanctions lifted. And it's very clear that this is going to be tough. I mean, for both sides, it's not a very nice and clean deal. So both sides are going to have a heck of a time selling it back in capitals. And so I think some of this pessimism is very real.
You know, Ambassador, when you look at here, we're at a point this week, you look at the developments in Yemen, a key U.S. ally in Saudi Arabia militarily getting involved there against what they believe is Iranian aggression. How can the United States potentially be helping to strengthen Iran in the region by cutting a deal on the nuclear front, and at the same time, which could then cause maybe more problems for key allies like Saudi Arabia?
Well, certainly Saudi Arabia is facing tough times. They've gone through a difficult succession. They've got an Iraq on their northern border, which, you know, sort of anything goes there. And now they have this Houthi rebellion in Yemen. So from the Saudi perspective, these are tough times. And then also from the Saudi perspective, they look at this deal with Iran, and what they see is something that goes beyond just the nuclear issue. They see some kind of emerging, or I should say re-emerging partnership with the U.S. and Iran. Remember, from the Saudi perspective, they look back in the 1970s and they saw a U.S. that considered the Shah of Iran, or considered Iran, the sort of their main factor in the Middle East. And so the Saudis don't want to see that kind of issue. So from their perspective, things have been very tough, especially about Iran and other Shia. And then, oh, by the way, we're asking them to go after these radical Sunnis in ISIS. So they have really, it's been quite a tough time.
Hey, two quick questions. Why isn't Iran, but why isn't one of the points of negotiation in this nuclear deal forcing Iran to recognize Israel's right to exist? Why isn't that included in the talks?
Oh, it's probably a bridge too far. And moreover, I think you have to remember that Iran is very split. You have these technocratic, you know, smart people from Tehran, and they have their own agenda to try to push back the Ayatollahs. But the Ayatollahs have no interest in normalizing with Israel. They have no interest in pulling back from issues in Syria and support for terrorist groups like Hezbollah. So it's very, they're very split themselves, not unlike the situation we have in Washington.
And finally, I want to get you to react to something that another former ambassador to Iraq said about President Obama's Middle East policy. He said this, this is James Jeffrey. He said, we're in gosh darn free fall here, although he didn't use gosh darn, when referring to the president's Middle East policy. Do you agree?
I think, frankly, there's so much different stuff going on. It's going to be a very nuanced policy, and the real difficulty is explaining it to people because it seems to have these counter-cross impulses. But overall, I think there's a successful effort to push back ISIS. The concern is, of course, that we're empowering these Shia militia groups. The real question is we have no onward policy for Syria, and as long as Syria is going to be this exporter of instability, it's going to be very tough for the region.